Hello! Today, we will be discussing the Bahay na Bato while exploring a creative Minecraft recreation that I built. Now to preface, this Minecraft build that you see behind me is based on images, videos, research, and writings that detail stuff like architecture and interior design of the Bahay na Bato. And as such, citation numbers will be presented on the bottom right corner of your screen, which will correspond to a source in the description whenever is applicable. Okay, let's get to it. Bahay na Bato is an iconic piece of ancestral architecture that sprouted in the Philippines during the Spanish colonial period. Before the Spaniards arrived, people generally lived in smaller neighborhoods called barangays that were more spread out. But when the Spaniards arrived, they realized, wait, it's pretty hard to control people when they're all spread out like this. So they tried to condense people into colonial cities in a process called reduction. But pre-colonial houses were generally made of light, flammable materials like bamboo and nipa, which meant that these denser areas were susceptible to fire. This was one of the first among many reasons as to why Filipinos were taught stonemasonry. We were taught how to build stone houses. We built stone houses. And from there, the Bahay na Bato was born. However, the first iteration of the Bahay na Bato is not quite the same as what we typically know it as today. The first Bahay na Bato, also known as the classical Bahay na Bato, was fully stone, even the second floor right here. But today, we associate Bahay na Bato with a style of architecture called the Arkitektura mestiza, or mixed architecture, which refers to how these ancestral houses have stone on their first floor and wood for their second floor. The mestiza Bahay na Bato, or Antillian Bahay na Bato, was invented or made in the 17th century, again as a response to the environment. To oversimplify, basically, the full stone houses resisted fire, yes, but they were susceptible to earthquakes. So, engineers at the time thought that mixing the materials would protect the houses from both fire and earthquake. But the mestiza Bahay na Bato is not merely a mixture of materials. This style of house actually takes great inspiration from our very own Bahay Kubo, especially with the second floor's wooden materials, roof, and some of its ventilation features. Of course, it cannot go without saying that trade had a large impact on the Bahay na Bato over time. As people and ideas come from places like Europe and China, their influence on our architecture spread. And, of course, the opening of Manila for free trade during the mid-1800s meant the expansion of its economy along with the greater wealth of the elites. Yes, it must be understood that the architecture of Bahay na Bato is not merely physical, but also social and political. Raquel B. Fernando in his book Las Casas would note that in the first 250 years of Spanish rule, the Bahay na Bato was a symbol of status. The bigger your house is, the more dominating it is, the richer you are. Now, funnily enough, this created a bit of a homogeneity in the furniture design of the houses because everybody was trying to look rich. So people just copied the furniture of their neighbors. Now, this historicizing and politicizing is important and is something we're going to come back to as we explore the build. Because the Bahay na Bato, like it or not, is inextricably tied to Spanish colonialism and the elite culture of that time. So without further ado, let's finally explore the build. Starting, of course, with the facade or the front of the house. Already you can see a few of the major decisions I've had to make in creating this house, like the materials I chose for the walls and the floors, stuff like that. Now, these were based on material analysis research, like the ones conducted by Angelus Maria Sales with the excavation work by the Batangas Field School program. So the first story, according to that research, is made of either adobe, bricks, or stone. For this build, I chose to make it out of stone bricks. Now, back then, stone was harder to come by in certain areas than adobe. So generally, if you had stone as your wall material, you might be a little richer, for example. Now, as with the second story, again, the materials here are hardwood, nara, etc. Actually, I mentioned it before, but the second story of the house is inspired by our very own Bahay Kubo. So this is where the materials of those come from. Now check out these bamboo trap doors, which represent the sliding capis windows found on the second story of Bahay na Bato. These are iconic windows. If you look at any images of Bahay na Bato, you'll see these always on the second floor, and there are whole rows of them. I chose bamboo here because it has a similar kind of grid thatched pattern. Not really sure how to describe it, but there it is. And here on the slab, this is the windowsill, also called the pasamano. And beneath this is an interesting piece of architecture. This is a ventanilla, which is, as you might expect from the word, it's a ventilation window. It's a small window beneath the window that's meant for ventilation, and this is again inspired by the Bahay Kubo and its extensive use of ventilation features. Of course, who could forget the equally iconic overhang of the second floor? So you'll look at any image of Bahay na Bato and you'll see that the second floor overhangs a little bit from the first one. That is called the volada. Now, this is not as prominent as it is here. Sometimes it's absent at all in some houses, but I decided to include it because it's iconic and it looks nice. As for the roof, now this is actually akin to the Bahay Kubo old thatched roofs. Some Bahay na Bato had this. Later on, they changed this for galvanized iron and other materials that were more resistant to rain. But I chose bamboo. I chose thatched roof here because it complements the capis windows well, and I just think it looks better, basically. Okay, before we enter the house itself, it's important to note that while I have taken some creative liberties with the design of this house, the floor plans of the house, the layout of the rooms, they are actually based on the floor plans of a vegan ancestral house, which was detailed in Las Casas, the book by Fernando. And of course, it's most important and perhaps I hope obvious is that not all Bahay na Bato is going to look like this. I don't think even a single one is going to look exactly like this. Every house is going to be different. So I've tried my best to include all of the, I suppose, commonalities between them. One major commonality that you will note is that the first floor of the Bahay na Bato, which is generally made of 2 floors, the first floor is reserved for storage, sometimes business. The second floor is reserved for living, or the living quarters. Take note of that because we're about to enter the house. So now as we enter the puerta principal, or the front door of the house, we are greeted by the zaguan. This is basically a large lobby. And I say lobby for two reasons. Number one, this is where a lot of things can be stored. This is where people store their calesas. So as you can see, there's a big door out here. Actually, I don't know if this fits. I think it fits. I don't know. Don't think about that. But there's a large door where you can fit your calesa through. So this is the calesa. And then there are also going to be sometimes caballerizas or stables for the horses. Hello, horsey. And not included in this build, sometimes there are also floats or platforms for saints during processions. Those are called carrozas, and they could also be placed here. Now, the zaguan is a lobby for a second reason. It is this reason over here. It is a waiting area, so to speak, for people who are waiting to do their business. So here you have the galinera, the couches. You have some chairs over here, another couch over here. People can wait right here as they're about to be admitted to the oficina. So these two rooms over here are the oficina, as you can see. These are the offices where people do their business. Now, supposedly, the existence of these oficinas in the first floor comes from wealthy Chinese businessmen who decided to integrate their workplace into their home, which I think is interesting, especially if you consider the fact that these Bahay na Bato exist in very busy areas, very busy streets of the colonial city. So it would make sense for them to have their business here as well. Now, in the oficina itself, you have the escritorio, or the desk, with the papers right here. You have the baul, which is the drawer, a chest called the caja de hierro, and that's going to be all for that. Now, also connected to the zaguan are the cuartos or habitacion. These are going to be the servant quarters or the servant rooms. This is where the servants and the workers will sleep. The main thing of note here is the size. These rooms, at least according to the floor plans, are small, and this is going to be an important distinction to make. So keep this in mind, because we will be comparing this to the master bedrooms on the second floor. Adjacent to the zaguan is the bodega, right here. Now this is the primary storage area, so to speak. This is where all kinds of stuff can be stored, like old furniture, wheat, chests, tools, farm produce, etc. There are even some papag here for the workers. These are these are bamboo beds. And this is where they can stay to sleep or to rest, stuff like that. Now, in the floor plans, there is this hallway, this unnamed hallway that is adjacent to the bodega and to the zaguan. I've decided to put some more furniture, to showcase some more furniture here. These include the capilla, which is a couch, the consola, which is a one-legged table, and on top of it, a basket of fruits, which is cool. There is the aparador de libros, which is a bookshelf, basically, and then there are some paintings. Hello, this is me in post. I would like to add an addendum regarding the paintings in this build and the paintings in the Bahay na Bato. In Jose Rizal's novel Noli, in the first chapter, he describes the paintings in a certain Capitan Tiago's house. Now, this novel is set in the mid to late 1800s, and these paintings are explicitly described to have European and Chinese influence. I realize that I've under-discussed this here, but the furniture truly is inspired or borrowed from foreign influences, much like our identity, and thus it reflects here in the furniture of the Bahay na Bato. Now over here on the far end of this hallway is the latrina and the baño, or the toilet and the bath respectively. Now in the first floor you'll see that these are placed in separate rooms, That is not always the case, but I think it's interesting the fact that they're in separate rooms, because presently these are usually in the same room, in the comfort room. Now, if we take a turn to the right, we can go to the indoor patio, or the patio. This is where the chores can be done. This is where the laundry, the drying can be done. This is supposed to be a wash line. This also doubles as a garden for this house. Now, sometimes these chores can be done in like an outdoor area with like a silong, but I've decided to put it all here in this patio. You can also chill here if you want. Now, for some final notes before we move on from the first floor, you will see these stylish trapdoors here. These are supposed to represent the calado or calyado, which is a piece of floral looking furniture placed above doors, but they also double as ventilation. So you'll see the holes here. Air can pass through that. Again, I like them because they look nice and they represent the ventilation centric architecture of Bahay Kubo. So I make extensive use of them in this build. As a final note, you'll notice that the flooring is made of granite. This is also again based on the literature. The Zaguan flooring is made of Chinese granite, and the foundation, which you'll see here, is made of stone. And then we're gonna start to get into the main area, I guess, for most people. Before that though, we have to ascend the escalera. This is the main stairway. The escalera almost always has at least one landing right here. This is called the descanso, but some houses will have a bigger mezzanine area called the entresuelo, and the oficinas may be placed there instead. In this case, it's just a descanso, a small landing. Here would be a hat rack called the bastonero. This is also where chairs are placed so people can sit. As you ascended the remainder of the escalera, you are greeted by the kaida, or the antesala, which is the public room before the sala, or the living room, over there. Now here is where people basically entertain themselves. Yeah. So Fernando would say social areas are of prime importance to the occupants of these colonial artifacts, which would make sense because, well, we like entertaining our guests. You know that adage, you know that saying that Filipinos are very hospitable? Well, that goes all the way back. So here in the antesala, we have stuff like the piano. We have the costurero, which is where people did their sewing, I suppose. And then you have the mariposa, which is a very intricate couch. I think this is also present in the sala. And then we have the riconeras, the corner couch, the estante, which is actually a rack. It's not wall shelves, but I couldn't find the rack furniture, so you're gonna have to bear with that. We have the pedestal here. We have the grandfather clock. Connected to the antesala are some cuartos. These are not yet the master bedrooms, but these are the bedrooms. These are bedrooms. Anyone can sleep here. Well, anyone important can sleep here. And you'll notice immediately that these are bigger and more spacious than the servant bedrooms. And we're gonna come back to that. Then we get to the sala over here. This is the living room. Here you have some, what is this? What is this? Some tea, candles, paintings, chandeliers, bookshelves, excuse me. This is where the people invite their guests over, and this is where they hold their, I don't know, you can do anything in here. Meetings, balls, dances, etc. Again, connected to the sala are the cuartos. These ones are the master bedrooms. Right here. And I just noticed that it's actually raining outside. That's quite cozy. One interesting detail that is connected to the sala is this part over here that is cordoned or sectioned off by these sliding capis doors. These are supposed to represent, there's no sliding doors in Minecraft, but This part, this little walkway here, is the volada. Now, not to confuse this with the overhang of the volada, this is the gallery volada. This is interesting because, as June Castro, or a former member of the ancestral houses of the Philippines, would say, this gallery, this corner gallery, well, not corner, the side gallery, is made so that the servants can pass unnoticed while guests are over. There is a whole route that you can take from the master bedroom through here, through the volada, and you'll notice that this does not at all pass through the sala into the despensa. Now, this room is essentially the pantry. This is where the ingredients and stuff needed for cooking and stuff like that are stored. The servants and workers can come here, take what they need, and go back the way they came. This is really interesting to me. Now, this is not present in all houses. This is present according to June Castro in Casa Luna. But the fact that it exists showcases the discrepancy between the treatment of the elites among themselves and towards their servants, right? This is a seemingly inconspicuous architectural decision, right? Adding this gallery here. But when you see and when you know the reason for its existence, the fact that it's supposed to hide the servants while guests are over, actually underlines that disparity. And again, we see that in the size of the houses, the size of the bedrooms rather, the size of the bedrooms here versus the size of the bedrooms of the servants. This is all a power choice. This is architecture, mind you, but this is all a power choice. And thus, it is a political choice as well. But even if this isn't present in all Bahay na Bato, and even if it isn't true, if that isn't the original purpose for it, still, so much for Filipino hospitality, right? Okay, another interesting room connected to the sala is this one over here. This is the
oratorio,
or the dedicated prayer room. That's right, the dedicated prayer room. If having saint carriages in the Zaguan didn't tip you off already, this should. This is a very extravagant display of the power of the Catholic Church during the Spanish colonial period, to which they were very, very powerful, to the point where you would want to have a whole room simply dedicated to the faith. So again, this is another architectural decision that is affected by power, and in this case, this is the power of the church in full display. Alright, going back to the Kaida, we can now go to this other adjacent room over here. This is going to be the comedor, or the dining area. As you can see here, big table with food. Some houses have the comedor connected to the entresuelo, or the mezzanine, but usually it's going to be here on the second floor. So you also have other furniture here, like the vajillera, which is a long table for, I think, plates. You have the riviera, which is a small couch in the corner. You have the hestia platera, which is the cupboard, basically. You have some trash cans. They did not, missing power, okay. They did not look like that, of course, during the time. And then over here, you actually have, again, the baño and the letrina. In this case, they're in the same room this time. Right next to the comedor is the cocina, which, as we all know, would be the kitchen. Now, forgive the somewhat modern-looking furniture here. One really cool detail, I suppose, of the cocinas during that time is that they had a banguera here, which is connected to the window, this is where the servants and the cooks would dry the washed plates. In this case, they probably would not dry because it's raining, but yeah, they would put the plates here to dry, which is pretty cool. And then out here, there is a stairway, and then there are going to be holes here, which will lead to the aljibe, which is a cistern, which is where they collect their water. Out here is going to be the azotea. This is the last room, if you could call it a room, of the second floor. This is going to have the martabana, which are, I believe, Chinese or just foreign decorated pots. And then a bunch of tables, a bunch of chairs for relaxing and just looking out into the streets, into the places, into the people. Right here. Alright, well, that about does it essentially for the exploration of the house itself. But before we conclude, I would like to comment on the placement of this house. So as you can see, this house, I just kind of dug out a large area so that I can build this house, and there is a missing block that is annoying me. Let me just fix that. Truthfully, I just placed this near this river. So this was kind of the main consideration that I had. Is there a river? And let me place it near there. The reason being, the house of Kapitan Tiago in Noli Tangere is near, actually overlooking the Pasig River. Now this is not the Pasig River, of course, but I wanted to kind of emulate that location. However, it's important to know that most bahay na bato during that time were actually closer to the center of the cities, also known as the plazas, because this is where like the church, this is where the commerce happens, this is where everything happens. So actually, a more accurate location for it, if we were to compare it to this village, would be maybe somewhere around here or somewhere around here, where everything happens, because of course the center of the colonial city is where everything is. Basically, it's the most convenient place to live, and so the rich would want to live there. The result of that, of course, is that the poor would be forced to the outskirts. That is less architecture, but that's more city planning. That's wealth disparity that manifests in the city planning, and that is wealth disparity that we still see to this day. So that about does it for this Bahay na Bato. As we've learned, the Bahay na Bato came about as the Spanish colonizers needed a way to condense the cities that is not going to burn in one fire incident. So they built stone houses. That was the original classical design. But then eventually those were also susceptible to earthquakes. So they invented Arkitekturang mestiza, or mixed architecture. And now we have these Bahay na Bato that is stone on the first floor, wood on the second floor. Furthermore, trade gave the Bahay na Bato design foreign influence from China and Europe. As well, the Catholic Church, which encroached on every aspect of people's lives, manifested in the design of the Bahay na Bato as well. Of course, over time, the Bahay na Bato became a status symbol as the economy of the colonial Philippines expanded and the elites became richer with it. But this also manifested wealth disparity and just disparity in general in the treatment between the elites and the servants, the rich and the poor. So you see, the Bahay na Bato is a pretty and elegant house that is deeply rooted in the history, culture, and politics of its time. Personally, it took me almost a month to research and build this house, but in the process, I did fall in love with its style and its general feel. Still, though, of course, we need to be aware and responsible with the fact that aesthetic is never neutral and architecture is never neutral. There's going to be politics and history in everything. And that is displayed here. That is going to be all. Thank you all for watching.